As it turns out, Dragon Age the Veilguard is a really big game, big enough that we are in fact still playing it as of the time of the recording, when the embargo is now up and we can talk about it. So I have Jordan Ramey with me here, who is reviewing Veilguard for GameSpot to give his in-progress thoughts on the game. We're going to be keeping it a little more casual, with our full review coming within the next day or so. And do not worry, we'll be keeping this conversation and footage as spoiler-free as possible, because if there's one thing that me and Jordan both feel very strongly about is I do not want to spoil anything from this game, because there is cool stuff that we will absolutely not be talking about.
Yes, we can mention that there's cool stuff, but we should not say what that cool stuff is.
No, absolutely not. So, Jordan, it's a new Dragon Age game. It's a new BioWare game. BioWare's reputation over the years has kind of, been up and down. People are kind of looking to this game, putting all their hopes and dreams on it. So I think it's got a lot riding on it. Do you like the game?
What a question. As of recording this video, I am about 25 hours into the game. So probably not anywhere actually close to finishing it, but a chunk. I've done a chunk. And so far, there are aspects of it that I do really enjoy. I'm a big fan of the characters. I'm a big fan of the lore dumps and the ability to see aspects of the setting that we have not been able to really see before. As a big Dragon Age nut, I am really in here for the story. At the same time, there are aspects of the combat that I'm not a huge fan of. There are aspects of the art direction that I'm not a huge fan of. And there are just things in regards to the main story that I'm like, Dragon Age has never been like, their main stories have never been this huge, incredible epic that I've enjoyed. I'm usually a bigger fan of the smaller stories. And so this one kind of remains steady in that opinion of like, I'm not a huge fan of the overarching plot. So it's kind of this game that I'm feeling not mid feels, I think, a little bit too harsh, but this was not the like out of the ballpark hit that I was really hoping to get from BioWare. But it's a good game. Like, I'm not saying like this game is trash, it deserves the worst possible review score ever. Like, I am enjoying myself, but I am not enjoying myself as much as I hoped that I would going in.
I also want to address BioWare. Their last couple of games have been a little rocky. Anthem, Mass Effect Andromeda. How does the game hold up in that regard?
I think it holds up in the regard that if people are really hoping for a return of the type of RPG that BioWare was making when they were doing Mass Effect 3 and Dragon Age Inquisition, there are aspects of those games that you will find here in this one. And so I think people who are looking for that return to form, they're going to find kind of that old school BioWare feeling when they play this game. At the same time, this game does not ignore the fact that Andromeda and Anthem were games that came out and they had systems to build upon. And there's a lot of aspects of the combat that do feel very Andromeda or Anthem focused. Like the whole like priming someone and then detonating, that's been in Mass Effect like for a very long time. But it became a huge central focus in Andromeda and was kind of like the backbone of Anthem's combat. And you can really, I think, feel it here in Veilguard, this idea of like setting up abilities and comboing attacks.
How do you feel about the overall change of the combat going more action-oriented? Because I think Mass Effect is actually a really good comparison. You have two companions on your side that you can't directly control anymore. When you pull up that tactical wheel, you're like, yep, this is the Mass Effect 2 and 3 wheel. It's kind of, it's very similar, I would say, in terms of kind of like setup and approach.
Yeah, I don't really know what game to really compare it to best describe Veilguard's combat. I'm enjoying aspects of it, but it's funny because I'm choosing to play as a mage. I'm not sure what class you're going with. I assume also
I went with mage as well.
Yeah, magic
yes,
boy.
I did.
But I wasn't really enjoying the staff so much, but then I started using the kind of like dagger, and I'm specializing in the spellblade option, and combat really started clicking for me a lot more when I adopted this closer range, parrying enemy attacks, throwing out a sword like a boomerang and having it come back to my hand. It feels almost like this action direction is geared a little bit more towards specializing, I feel, in the close combat. And just because of how this review works, I can't really just go back and start a new game just to see how things would be totally different. But I am very curious to try this game now using one of the other classes just to see, like, do they feel any better? Not to say that magic is bad. Magic is still very explosive and still very cool. But there are a lot of enemies in this game that like to get up in your face.
Yes, I basically had the same problem as you, especially with the staff, where when the enemies are constantly attacking you, it's like, dodge. Can I hit you now? No, I have to keep dodging.
Gotta
You're
keep
just
dodging.
like constantly dodging and dodging and dodging. It feels like you can never throw an attack off. I agree that the skill tree can vary so drastically, but it does require like a significant investment before you really start to hone into like the specifics that you want. So at least with Mage, it does feel like the combat takes a while to kind of ramp up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it leads into the fact, like as you said, we're not being able to control our companions this time around, and we're only having two. Like a lot of previous games, you would bring 3 allies along, unless I'm talking out my ass. I'm pretty sure.
No, it's 3.
Yeah, I'm like, maybe I'm misremembering. So there's one less body on the field. So playing a mage in Inquisition was not easy, but it was easy in the sense of like, oh, you could have 3 other characters tanking attacks for you while you were off on a hill casting spells, and you can't really do that in Veilguard, which is part of the reason why there are aspects of the combat that I'm not a huge fan of. This idea of setting something up to be detonated works really well in a game like Andromeda and Anthem, where you're using guns and shooting at enemies from far away, and you get this like nice bird's eye view of the battlefield. It's significantly harder when you're in the middle of all these magical effects exploding around you. Not impossible. This game's particle effects don't get too much in the way, but I have noticed times where I'm like, I don't really know what's happening, and I'm doing my best to just survive this combat encounter.
Sure. I think for me, it's a case of it is functional, it can be fun, but at least for myself, it loses a little bit of what I think made Dragon Age as a franchise unique in that kind of like tactical aspect. And kind of feels, like you said, it's borrowing more from other BioWare games. But I like that Dragon Age always felt separate from Mass Effect. So the idea of them more homogenizing, it's just not for me. But and I also agree with the combat getting a little messy, especially because every time you dodge, the lock-on like doesn't stick. So I feel like
I'm like, what's happening?
I'm constantly losing the enemy I'm trying to like work with because I keep having to dodge all the time. It's a little weird. The other big change to this game is the art style. It's, I think every Dragon Age game has changed its art style pretty significantly, I would say, to varying degrees. But this is maybe the most dramatic of a change, I would say.
Yeah, it's very clean. It's very pretty. It's very, I guess, the traditional idea of what high fantasy is. This idea of everything can look really nice unless it's evil. Then it kind of looks very mucky and gross. And there are definitely, I think, exceptions within the setting, but it's one of those things where I love it when I'm looking at the environment. I'm like, oh, I don't think any Dragon Age environment has looked this good. This is a world I want to get lost in and explore for hours and hours and hours. But then I look at the characters, and I'm like, everyone from the companions to major NPCs to minor NPCs, they're all these, like, beautiful, smooth skin, like, 20 to 30-year-old, like, people. And I'm like, where's the grime? Where are the scars? Where's the, like, indication that there are aspects of this world that make it hard to live in?
I completely agree. I mean, I agree about the environments for sure. I think they are absolutely gorgeous and do stay true to a lot of Dragon Age's aesthetic. I was telling you earlier how I thought Minrathous, like, they nailed it. Like that idea of what Minrathous looked so good. And you can see a lot of the architecture of that city is very similar to Kirkwall in Dragon Age 2, which makes lore sense because Kirkwall used to be part of the Tevinter Imperium. So, like, as a Dragon Age fan, I'm like, yeah, oh, they did it. Like, yeah, like, I'm excited. But then, yes, I agree that I think some of the characters just kind of have, you know, they're a little too clean at times. The big thing I know everyone online kind of got hung up on was the Quinari are very different. And I mean, like, you know, the Quinari in 2, they're very gruff and chiseled, and this they look a little too clean, and it's just it's just not for me.
and I don't know how to really get past that other than ignoring it. I'm playing as a Qunari. Are you playing as an elf, human?
I picked an elf.
Without going into spoilers, I feel like playing an elf is the way to go for this game, based on the plot lines that occur. I think if I replay this game, I'm going to roll an elf character, because there's a lot of plot lines that kind of deal with the elves' language and mythology and culture, and I'm like, I feel like I'm missing an aspect of playing as a character that could directly relate to these themes.
Also, a final note on the characters. I think their heads are just like a little too big, and it's weird. It's weird to me. I can't get over it. I'm just like, why everyone's heads are so like bigger than their bodies? It's just an artistic choice. That's weird to me.
Big head, and then the Qunari, you have horns. You have to make their forehead a little bit bigger to fit the horns, so it makes their head look ginormous in comparison to their bodies.
Exactly. It's very strange at times. So I think the final thing is obviously the structure of the game, how you interact with it, how you explore the world, side quests. That's another thing that Dragon Age has kind of messed around with a lot over the years. You know, original Origins was very kind of classic Infinity style, you know, Baldur's Gate-y BioWare.
Yeah.
Inquisition tried to have a more kind of open map, but it had a very MMO style loop structure that was not for me personally. I think that game has some amazing main quests, but then I just was so tired of collecting elf fruit, let me tell you, man.
But you need to plant it in the garden. And
you do. Unfortunately, the game kind of is like, you have to plant it. And I'm like, I guess I have to do it. How does Veilguard fare in that regard?
I don't think there's an issue with its structure per se. Like, I think the idea of going off on a mission and the goal is very clear isn't a bad mission type. It's been in video games forever. Go to your bread and butter, do that. At the same time, I do think it feels a little repetitive, and I don't want to say like too many things about it, because it's one of those weird things where, like, we're playing this for review. We're playing this as a way that most people probably will not be playing Dragon Age, where I'm like, I put 7 hours in a row of the game in a day.
Sure.
It's like, so most people probably aren't doing that. Most people are doing like only playing an hour or two and then saving it for the next day. But it is one of those things that, like, Dragon Age in the past has had mission types that are so unique, so special, so poignant, and I haven't really had that in Veilguard yet, outside of maybe one like exception, and I'm like 25 hours into the game.
Sure.
And that's worrying to me.
The missions are all good, I would say. Like, I don't think the game has the Inquisition problem where you're just doing a fetch quest that feels like completely superfluous. Nothing happened. I would say all the quests are like...
There's a story to each one.
There's a story to each one, and you're doing things. Like, I would say nothing feels like fluff. But, to your point, I also do think they all feel kind of the same in terms of what you're doing and the structure of them. There hasn't been... And again, we're not done with the game, so who can say? But, like, I haven't had a Winter Palace moment, which is the quest in Inquisition where you have to, like, go to this Orlesian ball and, like, potentially either save or help the Empress get assassinated. It's like one of the best.
There's like 7 different ways that mission can end, and like it's so good.
It's so good. Like, that is one of the best things BioWare has ever made. every BioWare game like has had a quest like that, has had a moment where they kind of like flip it on its head and have you do something different. And this hasn't quite had it so far for me.
Same. Yeah.
I also want to ask about the actual map design and stuff, because for me, it feels very God of War Ragnarok influenced in its design, I would say.
Yes.
Where you have these kind of areas that you go and you do a main quest, and then afterwards it unlocks an explorable version. There's side quests, there's collectibles, and there's stuff like that. How does that feel to you?
Because it's very, like you said, it's very similar to God of War. It's very similar even to Inquisition, because Inquisition was similar, but Inquisition was like, oh, these are huge open spaces as opposed to like very curated environments. So it's like this, it's a mixture of hubs as opposed to one open environment. And there are some environments in the game that I really like, and I think most of them are actually the more nature focused ones, like if they're like woods or something like that. I think they lend themselves to this idea of like exploring a space and uncovering it. I love the aesthetic of the city environments, but they're sometimes a little tricky to get around. Like they kind of twist and turn on each other in these very weird ways. And then also they feel not lifeless, but like it's just a bunch of NPCs kind of milling around. There's nothing, if you like toss some coins to a beggar or something, like nothing happens. People aren't having these conversations about like what's going on. There are aspects of the game that do have tangible effects on the aspects of the world, and that's really cool. But I almost wish that they dug in a little bit deeper to like push that emotional blade, because I've done some things in the game where I'm like, oh, this is really effed up. Like this was a bad thing that happened. I'm like, but I don't really care about these people. I care about my companions. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but it's the idea of like the worlds are pretty and they're designed super well, but the cities specifically, I wish that there was a little bit more curation to them to like really drive home that these are spaces that people are living in.
I totally know what you mean, because the cities, despite being cities, they don't function the way cities did in past Dragon Age games. Like you can't walk around and just like have random conversations with an NPC. You can go up to a vendor and you can buy stuff, but you can't be like, tell me your life story, or tell me how are you doing? What rumors are there? At first it feels like a subtle change, but I do think it adds up, where the lack of direct interaction with that city, it does create this sort of overall, like, you don't feel as connected to it. I think kind of what you said. So like it's a very different approach, and you know what, like, maybe I'm just an old school BioWare fan, but I like a good city hub area. I like talking to people and just being like, tell me what's going on, man. And like, you know, even if it's not important to the main story, I still feel like I learned something, or I'm getting a sense of the culture of this city. So it is kind of lacking in that sense, you know.
But yeah, it's the uphill battle that every Dragon Age faces. It's not like Mass Effect, where every game is building on each other. You're revisiting familiar locations. You're meeting a lot of the same characters. Every Dragon Age, it's like new protagonist, new squad mates, except for Varric. Varric's just always there.
Always there.
And just like, and exploring somewhat new locations. And so it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, in a different timeline, this is a game where it's like you're building on past relationships you've already established with these locations, and I have that emotional connection to this place because this is where Hawk, I don't know, kissed a girl for the first time, and now the city's destroyed, or something. I don't know, but yes. Long way of saying I wish there was a little bit more of an emotional connection to some of these locations.
And that kind of transitions to like sort of the last big aspect of this game, which is the companions. That is the emotional core of the game. I mean, they changed the name of the game to the Veilguard because they said the companions are the focus. So obviously they put a lot of stock in the companion. And I think that's always the big thing that everyone always asks with every BioWare game is like, well, how are the companions? Are they good? who should I romance? Who's the best one? So without getting into too many details of their specific storylines, how are you feeling about the companions?
Balara is mine and no one else can have her.
I do like Balara quite a bit.
But no, I think it takes 15-ish hours to recruit every companion.
Yeah.
So it's a chunk of time, and I think the ones that you recruit early are the ones that I have fallen in love with more. That is not to say that the ones that take a bit longer are bad, but like I've been with Nev and Balara and Harding for 25 hours now, and there are some people in the game that I've only been with for 5 hours at this point. So there hasn't really been an opportunity for them to really connect. I think it's a good group, though. I think it's a pretty solid group. It kind of overcomes the fact that I'm not a huge fan of Rook themselves in comparison to past Dragon Age protagonists. The companions make up for that. I'm a big fan of Balara. Harding was one of my favorite characters in Inquisition, so love to see her back. Neve is great.
Yep.
Canis is fantastic and
yes.
just so suave.
Yes. Canis is very good. I think he's going to be a fan favorite.
How about you? Who's your favorite?
Lucaris is definitely up there. Nev is up there. I mean, kind of all you said. I mean, I like Devrin. Honestly, like I think he's cool. I need to see more of him. Emmerich, the necromancer, I think has like a cool his like role in the universe of Dragon Age is really interesting. So I'm like curious to like explore him more, and his skeleton servant Manfred is awesome.
I think that's the best part about these companions, that every single one of them touches either on an aspect of the world that we've heard about before but have never had a chance to really get into, or they have introduced something to the lore of this setting that it's like that should be impossible.
Yeah, they recontextualize things
a lot of stuff. That's just very cool and interesting and makes me want to get to know them more over what I presume to be a 60-hour game. I don't know how long it's going to be. Ask me again at the end of the next week.
I would say that has been the greatest strength of this game, is that it still does very well the thing that I think Dragon Age as a series has always done very well, which is its like lore and setting are so well thought out and so fascinating, and each game will add a new layer to that universe that'll either like recontextualize like a thing you thought you knew with like, actually this has now happened, you're like, that's crazy, or you know, it like takes the opportunity to expand upon the characters and world. This entire game takes place in the northern region of Thetis, which we've never been in previous games. We've never
been up here before. So we've heard so many stories across all the games.
And as a Dragon Age fan, it is extremely fun and exciting to get to explore these places, you know? So for all my gripes I do have with the game in little ways that it has changed, like that aspect is still really good. And as a Dragon Age fan, like, you know, I mean, I'm just really happy that I have another one of these and I get to explore more of this universe, because I genuinely do really love Dragon Age as a setting and as a world.
100%. And I will have more concrete, full thoughts as I get through, but we definitely just wanted to sit down and like hash this out so that people who had the questions like, do I even get into the game? It's like, I mean, we're enjoying it. We have some issues with it, but like we're enjoying it.
Sure.
But also it's long. So if you want to know how I feel about the ending, I can't tell you yet.
Yeah. Exactly. Can't tell you yet. But yeah, those are our initial kind of thoughts and views. I would say overall, like I think you kind of nailed it up front, where it's like it's not knocking it out of the park, and that is kind of disappointing, but it is still a good game that I am enjoying. Where it goes from here, and will it stick the landing? Will it impress us in its second half? Only time will tell. When your full review comes out in hopefully a few short days after this video goes up. Thank you so much for taking the time. Jordan, this was supposed to be a 10-minute conversation.
Well, it's Dragon Age, so I don't know why we expected it to be that short.